So here we have what's called the spot welder. The spot welder is used to weld two pieces of sheet metal together. Basically we have the controller back here. The controller has an on and off switch, which will just activate power to the machine, as well as a timer. So the timer is going to give us the duration of time that the current is being passed through the spot welder. And we'll be adjusting this depending on the type of material and the thickness of material. So here we have the contraption that's actually going to weld our two pieces of sheet metal together. We have these two copper electrodes leading out and join at the end here with two weld tips. We can open and close the jaws of the electrodes simply by lifting and lowering the handle on the backside. The two electrodes get clamped together with some kind of cam lock that's activated by the handle on the backside. And we can adjust the pressure with which it clamps down on our sheet metal pieces by adjusting a couple of screws in here. Most of the time, however, these will already be adjusted perfectly for the various types of thicknesses that we'll be working with. Underneath the handle, there's a switch. It's a rocker switch, so it moves from left to right. Important not to try and force it up and down. It's very much so a left to right action. So once we clamp our two pieces of sheet metal together and we press and hold the switch, there's an electric current that's going to be passed through these two electrodes. Our two pieces of sheet metal that are in between the two electrodes here have a very high resistance to electrical current, and therefore are going to heat up very locally around the position where the two electrodes are clamped down onto. It's going to heat up so much, in fact, that locally the sheet metal is going to melt and fuse together and create what's called a spot weld. And once it's cooled down, the two metals have been fused and therefore create a nice permanent joint in our sheet metal. So the timer that's on the controller box back here is very important because it's going to control the amount of time that the current is being passed through our sheet metal. And therefore, what we have to do is press and hold the switch. We can let go of the switch early and it'll shut off the machine early. However, if we want a nice full penetration spot weld, then we're going to let it run for the full allotted time on the timer. And depending on the different thicknesses, so if I was working with sheet metal that was a little bit thicker, I would need more heat to fuse the metals, and therefore I would pass the current for a longer period of time. So I'm just going to give an example of what the spot welder can do. I'm going to weld these two pieces of sheet metal together. So I'm going to position them like so and clamp them underneath the jaws. And I'm going to clamp down with the lever on the backside. And then I'm going to press and hold the switch, which will pass the current through and weld those two pieces of sheet metal. As I said before, we have to press and hold the switch. So there's the weld. Once the timer has reached 0, the machine will turn off. You may notice that my finger is still on the switch, yet the machine has indeed finished its weld. Once I let go of the switch, the timer is going to reset and it's ready to perform another spot weld. So now I can open up the jaws and liberate my sheet metal. And the two pieces have now been spot welded together. And if we look on both sides of the spot weld, we see that it's a nice full penetration weld. We do want to be careful because the metal did get hot enough to melt and fuse at that local point, and the heat is going to dissipate the length of the sheet metal. So there's a good chance that the sheet metal is still very hot, and we always want to treat it as very hot. So we don't want to go ahead and grab it right away. We do want to make sure that I'm not going to burn myself if I go ahead and manipulate this piece of sheet metal. So we can see that the two pieces have been joined and the spot weld is indeed strong enough to hold. Just one spot weld is strong enough to hold these two pieces of sheet metal enough that I can't separate them when trying to bend the sheet metal. So it's a very useful application in manufacturing when you're working with sheet metal. It avoids having to use screws, bolts, and can quickly assemble different pieces of sheet metal to make a very more complex assembly very quickly and easily.